has invited U.S. President Donald Trump as chief guest at next year's Republic Day parade. This invitation is an important one because it has often been extended to heads of nations India considers its close friends and allies. The Trump administration has not confirmed whether he will accept the invite, but it comes in the backdrop of increasing trade tensions between India and the United States. In fresh news, though, India has only just extended the deadline to impose higher tariffs on U.S. imports by 45 days. Now, while the U.S. has upgraded India's status as a trading partner to the same level as its NATO allies just a couple of days ago. So is this a sign of a thaw in what is increasingly becoming a blow-hot, blow-cold relationship? In fact, where does the India-U.S. relationship stand right now? To speak more on this, I'm joined now by Meera Shankar, former ambassador to the United States of America. We're also speaking with Ajay, former secretary of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for speaking with us here on Primetime Debate. Ms. Shankar, if we just look at a couple of things that have fallen into place over the last few days. We know that the invite was sent earlier this year to Donald Trump for the Republic Day parade. The White House has only just confirmed that the invite has been received. So, of course, there's speculation about whether he will come. They've upgraded our status for trading, as a technology partner or for trading sensitive high-tech products. We have extended our deadline for the retaliatory tariffs we imposed on them. Are we moving towards a thaw?
Well, I think there have been some positive developments over the last week or so. One is that the U.S. cleared the sale of, armed drones to India. Earlier, they were looking only at surveillance drones, and there were still hesitations about whether they should really clear the armed drone technology for India, but they have now cleared it according to news reports. So that was one thing. The second was that the CAATSA, the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which had imposed possible sanctions on Russia's defense partners, has now been amended to provide for a waiver for Russia's traditional partners who are transitioning, such as India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and of course it's still subject to the process, but it's a positive thing that these amendments have been made because there was concern in India over this, over the extraterritorial jurisdiction, and also the fact that so much of our weapon systems, 60%, still are from Russia. So something like this could really, make things very difficult for us. And the third thing is upgradation of India's status. It's something which the Obama administration had done by designating India through legislation as a major defense partner and saying that it would henceforth be treated on par with the US's closest allies. But the specifics of what this would entail had not been clarified, and now this has been done by the Trump administration. So it would up the level of technology, that US technology that India could have access to, and it would make it very much easier because you wouldn't need licenses. Yes, the trade issues are there. The Trump administration's agenda has been somewhat protectionist on trade, but we've been there before. We had the trade frictions with the Obama administration also. What has happened, which is good, is that the commercial dialogue has been hived off from the strategic dialogue, which will now have the foreign minister and the defense minister from both sides, from the Indian side, and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense from the US side, thereby enabling them to focus much more clearly and substantively on the important strategic issues which bring the two countries together, and leaving trade issues to be discussed in another forum. the fact that India is considering extending the deadline within which the retaliatory sanctions that it was imposing were to come into effect from 4th August, it's extending it by another 45 days, perhaps is an inkling that the trade dialogue is going well, because the objective of any country should really not be to impose sanctions or tariffs, but to see if these issues can be resolved to mutual satisfaction. So a round of trade talks took place, and the feedback was that they were reasonably constructive, and another round perhaps is due. So we have to see where this takes us as well, where the trade dialogue takes us.
Okay, so some significant developments over the last few days. Mr. Dua, would you like to weigh in? Is it fair to say that there seems to be a thaw in the making?
I think so. Though I would like to point out that our kind of conflicts on trade, if I can use the word like conflict, those aren't something very new. The US and India have gone before the WTO as many as 18 times in the last, ever since the kind of the WTO forum was created for reference of such disputes. But that has not come in the way of our strategic relationship developing. The last decade itself has seen, after the Cold War years, how trust was building up between the two countries, confidence, and we were getting onto a same wavelength on a number of international and bilateral issues. I think the two would probably continue to proceed in parallel. We may have issues of trade, and I'm not underestimating the significance of the trade issues, because unlike with the Chinese or the European Union or Japan, with us, the US deficit is a trade deficit is not only in goods, but it is also in services. Whereas with the other three, the deficit, though much larger than with India, is only in goods, whereas the US has surplus with these three blocks in the matters of services. So definitely these issues are going to be coming up. There could be some retaliation from the US, likely some counter-reaction or some reaction from our side. But like today's notification, the Ministry of Commerce has decided today, I understand, that, as you also pointed out, that we would not be effecting the higher duties on 29 items, which was being imposed in retaliation to the trade what sufferance we were going to have because of the higher duties on steel and aluminum items. I think, apart from the trade dialogue probably continuing well, there could be issues arising as we go forward on immigration, H-1B visa issues, because that impacts services. There could be issues again coming with respect to the priority list on the intellectual property side. But these are not, none of these, I would say, or neither of these is something which has come up only now. For several years, these have been on the table and have been talked about, but that's probably not going to impact our further growth and bonding, I would say, in strategic matters, both political as well as on the military front.
True, Mr. Dua, you say that trade issues have always existed. I think Ms. Shankar wants to comment. The only point I was making is that trade issues may have always existed, but United States being led by Donald Trump is a new situation, and I think it's key we look at it in this light as well. Let Ms. Meera Shankar just come in. Yes.
Well, I think I'd like to put our trade issues in perspective. Because Mr. Dua mentioned that unlike Europe and China, the US has a deficit in services also. But you have to see the total volume. The total volume of trade between India and the US grew last year in 2017 and reached $126 or $128 billion in both goods and services. And the um, trade surplus that India had came down to $28 billion in both goods and services. Now you compare it with the trade surplus that China has with the United States, which is $375 billion. It's much more than our total trade, or even Europe. But you know, the real problem is really with China because they don't follow market based policies. So, you know, when you look at it like this, then really the US's issues with India are of a minor nature, though they see the potential of the market. And yes, these are hardy perennials, stronger IPR, greater market access, including for US agricultural products. And from the Indian point of view, now a new issue is the somewhat restrictive policy on issuing H-1B visas, which adversely impacts the climate within which our IT companies do business in the United States, apart from the steel and aluminum tariffs, which really affect about 2% of the US's imports, which come from India. So the other factor is that the US, on some of the other issues, such as the subsidies which they have taken to the WTO seeking consultations, saying India has to phase out the subsidies now that this per capita income has crossed the threshold, has not raised a dispute or taken unilateral action. It has chosen to go through the WTO route, which institutionally is certainly better and gives space for the two countries to discuss these issues. Clearly, yes, there is a protectionist agenda which President Trump is following, with which he had said also as part of his mandate. But I think India is not such a major trading partner of the US as to be the main focus of US action.
True. I just wanted to bring up a couple of things. We've been talking about India extending the deadline for the retaliatory tariff, so to speak, that we imposed. There has been no word on whether the United States will relax its stance on the aluminum and steel tariffs that they have imposed on us. So that was one quick point I wanted to bring out, and I'll let Mr. Dua come on that very quickly. The second point also, Mr. Dua, was a report in the Economic Times which said that the United States may bring up concerns that companies like Amazon and Walmart may have with a draft of our new e-commerce policy, which is being seen by some of these players as protectionist to Indian e-commerce players. So do you think that these problems will keep cropping up in an administration in the United States which is very, very focused on America first and Make in America?
I think so. Clearly, the US is moving towards a protectionist regime, a country which is more getting greater belief in bilateral relationships on trade matters rather than going through multilateral institutions like the WTO. It is transactional business. Trade usually is, but there's much more now than it's ever been before. You talked about the e-commerce draft policy, which was announced only yesterday. I think certainly the issues would come up on behalf of Walmart, which has acquired a controlling stake in Flipkart, and Amazon. Between the two of them, they have almost 2/3, if not a little more, 70% of the e-commerce trade in India. And the draft policy, in order to make things on an even keel, level playing field, the word which is being used, between the Indian e-commerce players, who happen to be much smaller, and these two giants, they are getting impacted. The kind of the various conditions which have been imposed upon them, including saying that they cannot offer deep discounts. After 2 years, there's a sunset clause there. They cannot, going forward, also have foreign equity of more than 49%, and that too only if they deal with local items. That means the items are locally procured. There are various conditions which certainly can be conceived as saying the change of rules after these two companies have invested in India or acquired assets which were in the e-commerce space. I wouldn't be at all surprised if these issues get raised at a government-to-government level and become a subject of discussion in the trade negotiation, current or further, or the ongoing ones or the later ones. What was the second question? Sorry, which you raised.
No, I just wanted to come. No, sure. I just wanted to come to Ms. Meera Shankar on where we began from, which was the invitation to Donald Trump, and I just want to focus on that for a bit because if you look at the list of chief guests we've had, say since 2014, and that has been, I would say, an important part. Perhaps of the Modi government's diplomatic efforts. We started with Barack Obama, then there was, of course, the French premier, then UAE, and we had 10 chief guests last time from our eastern neighbors. So how crucial is it for Donald Trump to accept, and what is the significance if he does?
Well, because the Republic Day has a lot of national importance in India, and the chief guest is always somebody who's, comes from a country with whom we value the relationship. I think President Obama set the trend of visiting India in each of his terms. In the first term, he visited India in the second year. He took power in 2009, was here in 2010. Again, he visited as chief guest for the Republic Day. So I think it is important that President Trump visit India because otherwise then the sense is that though we are strategic partners with increasing convergences in Asia and on several other issues, that we don't really figure on President Trump's radar because his focus till now in Asia has been largely on East Asia. It's been on North Korea as an offshoot of that, on South Korea. It's been on China, where the strategic competition is sharpening and where, trade conflicts are looming much larger than they used to in the past. Now, his team obviously has been focusing on India. That's why we've seen these recent decisions as well in the field of defense and high technology trade. But we also need to have attention at the highest level. And I think whether it's the Republic Day or whether it's subsequently, I think it is important that President Trump should make a visit to India.
Right. I think the next important step would be the 2+2 strategic dialogues, between the Secretary of Defense and External Affairs on both sides, which has been postponed twice. So let's see how that goes. Thank you so much, Meera Shankar, as well as Ajay for speaking with us today.